October 14th, 1943. 25,000 feet above Germany, the thin air vibrates with the sound of war. Staff Sergeant Michael Romano crouches in the cramped, frozen tail of his B-17 Flying Fortress, hands gripping twin 50 caliber machine guns that weigh nearly as much as he does. Outside his plexiglass dome, a Focke-Wulf 190 slices through the clouds, positioning for the perfect kill. 6 o'clock low, the bomber's blind spot. Romano steadies his breath, peers through the crude ring and bead sight, two cold metal circles meant to represent precision, and opens fire. Tracer rounds streak into the void, arching harmlessly behind the German fighter. The FW-190's cannons flash in response, spitting 20mm shells that rip through the fortress's aluminum skin as if it were paper. Romano ducks instinctively. The sky flashes white, then red. The bomber shudders. This scene, one man against the Luftwaffe's finest, repeats itself nearly 300 times across the skies of Schweinfurt that day. 291 bombers launched. By nightfall, 60 lay burning in enemy fields, and 138 more return, so shredded that they'll never fly again. Over 600 American airmen perish a single day's butcher's bill that threatens to collapse an entire strategy. At the 8th Air Force headquarters in High Wycombe, commanders gather in silence. Their doctrine of daylight precision bombing, the idea that mass formations of flying fortresses could overwhelm German defenses through sheer volume of fire, is crumbling. Mathematics tells the brutal truth. No crew is expected to survive 25 missions. Tail gunners, supposedly the last shield against attacking fighters, achieve hit rates below 8%. The Luftwaffe knows it. German pilots simply approach from behind, absorb a few seconds of inaccurate fire, and carve apart the bombers one by one. But on that same day, while generals debate strategy and engineers draw blueprints months from completion, a young gunner at Bassingbourn Airfield, a 2-year-old with a steelworker's hands and no formal education, is sketching something in his logbook that will rewrite the odds of survival. Something his superiors will call illegal. Something that will triple the accuracy of tail gunners and save thousands of lives. His name, Michael Romano. And his weapon isn't just a gun, it's an idea. To understand his innovation, you must first understand the impossible position of a World War II tail gunner. The Flying Fortress was a marvel of American engineering, bristling with 13 machine guns, boasting overlapping arcs of fire. A flying battleship, the propaganda posters declared. But the air war over Europe was no Hollywood reel. Romano's station was smaller than a coffin, a claustrophobic metal bubble bolted to the aircraft's tail. Temperatures dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius. Frost crept along his oxygen mask. His knees pressed into cold steel, his feet braced against vibration. Every movement required muscle and luck. The Army trained him for just 6 weeks, enough to load, clear jams, estimate range, and pray that his bullets might find a target. His sighting system? A ring and bead primitive, even by 1,932nd standards. Against high-speed fighters closing at over 500 miles per hour, it was guesswork. Romano had to estimate the enemy's velocity, compute deflection angles, anticipate bullet drop, and fire before the Germans' cannons, 4 times the range of his own guns, tore through his position. Expert gunners, trained under controlled conditions, barely reached 12% accuracy. In combat, the stress, cold, and oxygen deprivation pushed that number down to 6. The Luftwaffe learned fast. By mid-1943, German pilots refined a deadly rhythm, approach from 6 o'clock low, endure a few seconds of chaotic gunfire, unleash 20mm cannon bursts, and bank away before the bomber's return fire could adjust. In just 3 months, the 8th Air Force's attrition reached catastrophic levels. Schweinfurt, Regensburg, Münster, every mission ended with smoldering wreckage. General Hap Arnold himself began questioning whether daylight bombing was even survivable. Engineers proposed fixes, powered turrets, heavier guns, better armor, but those were factory solutions, months away. Impossible for crews already stationed in England. And while the Army waited for production lines, men like Romano were dying every day. On August 19, 1943, Romano flew his first mission over the Netherlands. He fired 480 rounds at 3, attacking FW 192nd and missed every shot. His gunnery footage, reviewed later, showed tracers streaking harmlessly through empty air. That night, staring at the shredded fuselage of his aircraft, he began to realize the problem wasn't the gun. It was the sight and the fact that tail gunners were fighting blind. He needed a way to see where his bullets would go before he fired. He needed feedback. He needed a reflector sight. But official models didn't fit the cramped tail, and Army regulations strictly forbade modification of weapon systems. So Romano decided to break the rules. He wasn't supposed to be an inventor. Born in Pittsburgh in 1924, Romano had dropped out of high school to work in the steel mills. When the war came, he joined the Air Force to escape the furnace, only to find another kind of fire in the skies over Europe. His training records described him as average, nothing exceptional. No one expected him to change history. But factory work had given him something far more valuable than grades: mechanical intuition. He understood the way metal behaved, how reflections bent light, how heat distorted glass. And above all, he understood when a machine didn't work. After his 5th mission, exhausted and furious, Romano climbed into his bomber after dark with a flashlight and a logbook. The air still smelled of burnt hydraulic oil. He stared at the sight that had failed him. In the curve of the plexiglass window, he caught a reflection of himself, and that reflection gave him the idea. What if mirrors could give him peripheral vision of his tracers? What if he could see his bullet path in real time, correct his aim mid-burst, and track fighters without losing sight of his target? He sketched feverishly, measuring angles with a salvage protractor, calculating lines of sight by hand. His plan was primitive but revolutionary, a combination of angled mirrors and a salvage reflector glass, letting him watch both the reticle and his tracer feedback simultaneously. It wasn't sophisticated, it was survival by ingenuity. By dawn, he had a full schematic, and by regulation, he had just broken 6 separate military laws. But Romano didn't care. He wasn't designing for approval, he was designing to live. Romano knew what he was about to do could end his career or worse. Technical Order Z0120EG2 of the U.S. Army Air Forces explicitly forbade any modification to a bomber's defensive armament without written approval from Engineering Command. Unauthorized alterations were treated as potential sabotage. But Romano had already watched too many crews die while waiting for permission. He needed someone who could help him build the thing, someone who understood metal the way he did. He found that man in the base sheet metal shop, Technical Sergeant Frank Kellerman, a 38-year-old mechanic from Detroit. Kellerman was a Depression-era survivor, a man who'd built bridges with scavenged scrap in the Civilian Conservation Corps. When Romano showed him the sketches, Kellerman studied them silently for a minute. "This is illegal," Kellerman finally said. "Yes, Sergeant," Romano replied. "You're asking me to modify a combat aircraft without clearance, using broken parts and scrap?" "Yes, Sergeant." Kellerman exhaled slowly. "When do you fly again?" "Tomorrow, Munster." "Then we'd better get to work." That night, in a corner of the maintenance hangar, lit only by tool lamps, the two men set to work. The parts came from everywhere. Curved mirrors from damaged navigation instruments, plexiglass shards from shattered canopies, aluminum brackets from written-off airframes, and the reflector sight assembly from a wrecked P-47 Thunderbolt. The reflector sight was the heart of the system, a small piece of glass etched with a glowing reticle that allowed pilots to aim without aligning their eyes to iron sights. But fitting it into the B-17's tail required imagination. Kellerman reshaped the mounting brackets by hand, welding them to fit the cramped space. Romano experimented with mirror angles, positioning 3 convex mirrors to give him overlapping fields of view behind the guns. By 4:30 a.m., the crude assembly was bolted into the tail of Knockout Dropper, Romano's assigned aircraft. The installation was ugly, improvised, and completely unauthorized, a Frankenstein system of scavenged parts held together by safety wire. It didn't appear in any maintenance logbook, and at dawn, when the crew assembled for briefing, nobody but Romano and Kellerman knew it existed.
Risks, Colonel.
At 7:30, Knockout Dropper lifted off from Bassingbourn Airfield. Target, Munster, Germany. Altitude 25,000 feet. Enemy fighters expected heavy resistance. At 10:15 a.m., over hostile territory, a Messerschmitt Bf-109 appeared low at 6 o'clock, the classic attack vector. Romano adjusted his guns, peered through the new sight. The reticle floated in front of him, perfectly stable, like a ghostly compass. In his peripheral vision, the mirrors caught the flicker of his own tracers. Bending light just enough to show their trajectory, he fired a 3-second burst. The mirrors revealed the round striking behind the fighter. He adjusted slightly, a few degrees forward on the reticle, fired again. This time, the tracers intersected the fighter's path. The Messerschmitt's engine erupted in black smoke. It rolled inverted and dove out of sight. Romano's oxygen mask muffled his words. "Holy hell, it works!" When Knockout Dropper returned at 13:40 hours, Romano had his first confirmed kill. His pilot, Lieutenant James Holbrook, congratulated him, unaware that the victory came from an illegal invention hidden in the tail. The celebration ended 20 minutes later. During inspection, Crew Chief Master Sergeant Donald Pierce spotted the modification and reported it. Within an hour, Captain Richard Voss, the squadron's armament officer, stormed onto the flight line. "Sergeant Romano," Voss barked, "would you care to explain the unauthorized equipment installed in your gun position?" Romano stood at attention. "Sir, I installed an improved sighting system." "You what?" Voss's voice rose. "Do you have any comprehension of the regulations you violated? This isn't a garage experiment. Unauthorized modifications can cause electrical failures, fires." "Sir, the system works," Romano interrupted. "I shot down." "I don't care if you shot down the entire Luftwaffe," Voss shouted. "Remove it immediately or face court-martial for destruction of government property."
Let's just get this over
The
with.
tension on the flight line was electric. Romano's pilot, Holbrook, stepped forward. "Captain, my tail gunner got his first kill using that sight. Maybe we should—" "Your opinion is noted, Lieutenant." Voss cut him off coldly. "The modification will be removed. That's final." But word spread quickly. By dinner that night, every gunner on base knew about Romano's mirror sight and how it worked. The enlisted crews were fascinated. The officers were alarmed. The following day, an emergency meeting was called. 14 officers packed into a briefing room. Captain Theodore Morrison, assistant armament officer, opened the session sharply. "Gentlemen, we have a discipline problem. A sergeant has performed unauthorized modifications using salvage components. If every enlisted man starts rebuilding his aircraft, we'll have chaos." Major William Calhoun, operations officer, stood up. "With respect, sir, that's absurd. Romano shot down a fighter using this system. Our tail gunners hit 8% of their targets. If his design improves that, even marginally, we should test it." "Test it?" Morrison snapped. "We have one engagement, one kill, and no data. That's not a test, it's an accident." "Then let's collect data," Calhoun countered. "Send him up tomorrow with gun cameras rolling. If it works, we adopt it. If it fails, we ground it. But we can't ignore it because it wasn't filed on the right form." The room erupted in argument, safety officers citing regulation, combat officers citing casualty reports. The debate reached Colonel Stanley Ray, commander of the 91st Bomb Group. Ray, a First World War veteran, listened in silence for nearly an hour. Then he asked quietly, "How many bombers did we lose last week?" 17, sir," came the reply. "And how many confirmed kills did our tail gunners record?" 3. Ray nodded. 17 bombers, 680 boys, 3 kills. "Captain Morrison, your concerns about regulations are valid, but I'm more concerned about losing 17 goddamn planes a week." He turned to Romano. "Sergeant, your modification stays. You'll fly 3 missions with gun cameras recording every engagement. If your accuracy improves measurably, we'll authorize it across the group. If it doesn't, you'll face disciplinary action. Understood?" Romano saluted. "Yes, sir." Ray looked around the room. "Gentlemen, meeting adjourned, and somebody get me those damned mirror drawings." What followed was one of the most unorthodox experiments of the air war. On October 12, 1943, Romano flew with gun cameras rolling. Over Bremen, his modified sight guided him through 2 attack runs. The footage later showed something no one had ever seen before: a tail gunner correcting fire in real time, walking tracers onto target, destroying 2 enemy aircraft with less than 400 rounds total, where the average gunner needed nearly 3,000. The results couldn't be ignored. Even Captain Morrison, who had threatened punishment days earlier, admitted under his breath, "All right, it works." Once the film cans were developed and the gun camera reels threaded through the projector, the room went silent. Officers leaned forward. Sergeants held their breath. What the footage revealed was not luck. It was a repeatable method. On the first pass, you could see Romano fire, watch the tracer skim behind the FW-190, then, without breaking cadence, correct by 1 reticle width and stitch the fighter's wing route. On the second pass, a BF-109 tried the classic 6 o'clock level approach. Romano led early, walked the stream into the canopy, and the Messerschmitt peeled away, trailing smoke. Time on trigger, seconds. Rounds expended, hundreds, not thousands. Even the skeptics had to admit the obvious. The mirror-assisted reflector sight turned a tailgun from a hope into a system. "All right," Captain Morrison said at last, jaw tight. "It works, but it's a one-off. We need drawings, standards, a procedure." Colonel Ray didn't wait for Washington to bless a miracle. "How long to build more?" he asked Technical Sergeant Kellerman. "With 3 men in the shop and a pile of scrap, 4 per day," Kellerman replied. If we can scavenge reflector sights right off P 47 seconds and refit the brackets, then start tonight. Ray didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every tail in this group gets one within 2 weeks. And so Bassingbourn Airfield became an assembly line that procurement would have called impossible or illegal if they'd seen it up close.
We know you weren't at your post.
Mirrors were polished from salvaged navigation instruments. Convex edges trimmed on bench grinders that wheeze from overuse. Brackets were cut from wrecked airframes, deburred by hand, drilled on tired presses, and bolted into the tails with safety wire and cold fingers. The reflector sights, the beating heart, were treated like sacred objects, dismounted from broken fighters, cleaned, realigned, and refitted to the B-17's yoke with clever welded saddles that would have horrified any Boeing drafting room and yet fit like they had always been meant to live there. By October 20th, 18 fortresses in the 91st Bomb Group launched with Romano's modification. The results landed harder than any memo. Over Durin, tail gunners with the new sights scored 11 confirmed kills out of 47 attacks, roughly a 23% engagement success rate, nearly triple the prior baseline. Over Wilhelmshaven on November 3rd, 16 confirmed out of 68. On November 5th, another baker's dozen. The numbers weren't a blip, they formed a line. The line pointed away from annihilation. Here's where the narrative of one illegal fix becomes a study in wartime economics. Strategic bombing was an arithmetic of anxiety. The U.S. could build airframes faster than Germany, but not faster than physics. Wow. A fortress loss meant 10 men gone, an aircraft gone, a training pipeline burdened, a replacement crew less experienced than the one it replaced. The Luftwaffe needed only to sustain rear quarter attacks to keep that math tilted. Romano's sight altered the cost curve. Every rear attack that ended in a smoking 109 or a broken FW 190 forced German pilots to reconsider angles, extend approach times, and accept higher risk. Those added seconds, those stutters of caution saved aircraft as surely as armor plate. News of the Bassingbourn fix traveled the only way innovations travel in war, by rumor first, then film, then orders. Brigadier General Frederick Castle appeared unannounced on the hard stand on November 18th, climbed into the tail himself, squinted through the glass, and asked Romano the question senior officers rarely ask enlisted men: "How did you know this would work?" "I didn't," Romano said honestly. "I knew the old sight didn't."
Per day.
Castle laughed a sharp, relieved sound in a season that had offered little to laugh about and turned to Kellerman. "Can this be built at depot level?" "Yes,
Start
sir.
tonight.
We've got proper drawings now. With correct stock, better still." "Good," Castle nodded. "I'm authorizing immediate implementation across the fourth wing." Authorization turned improvisation into doctrine. What began as mirrors wired in place with the smell of burnt flux still hanging in the air became a kit with part numbers, tolerances, and installation guides. Maintenance sections received stencils and templates to align mirrors to known sightlines, compensating for parallax and tail flex. Armorers trained crews to use the system short bursts. Watch the mirrors, correct by half a reticle, fire again. The language of survival became a checklist. And the Luftwaffe noticed. German after-action reports terse, professional, increasingly strained, began to warn against complacent 6 o'clock attacks. Pilots complained of unexpectedly accurate tail fire and recommended shallow, oblique, or head-on passes instead. That shift mattered. Head-on attacks were faster, harder to execute, and more dangerous for the attacker. They demanded discipline, coordination, and a tolerance for risk that only the most experienced Jagdgeschwader could sustain. In pushing the enemy out of their comfort geometry, Romano's sight didn't just protect the tail, it reshaped the battle rhythm of the air war. From a systems perspective, Romano had introduced a simple feedback loop into a place that had never had one. Before the modification, a tail gunner fired into probability. He guessed a lead, squeezed, and awaited a verdict delivered in smoke or silence. The mirror reticle combination collapsed that uncertainty into now. It was, in miniature, an OODA loop advantage. Observe, orient, decide, act, executed at 300 yards and 300 knots, repeating every second. The ability to observe tracer truth while orienting aim made the decision trivial and the action immediate. Multiply that across dozens of tails and you dilute the enemy's freedom of action. The ripple effects reach Seattle. Boeing's Cyan Modification Center, already deep into redesigning the B-17's tail to improve field of fire, integrated the principle that Romano and Kellerman had proved in combat. Put a proper reflector sight where the gunner's eyes actually work, optimize glazing, and give the man ergonomic leverage instead of a wrestling match. When the Cheyenne tail began rolling out on late-model B-17Gs in early 1944, its innate reflector sight sat almost exactly where Romano had bolted his salvaged P-47 sight months earlier. History would remember the Cheyenne turret as a factory triumph. The film reels from Bassingbourn tell another truth. The factory caught up to the field. By December 1943, more than 200 fortresses across several bomb groups flew with field-expedient mirror reflector systems. Losses to pure rear-quarter attacks fell measurably by roughly a third in units that adopted the mod and trained to it even before escort coverage improved and even before the Cheyenne tails proliferated. The psychological shift was just as important. Crews who had once climbed into tails with the fatalism of men counting missions, now strapped in with the cold, necessary confidence of artisans who knew their tools. There were still arguments. Of course, there always are. Staff officers worried about standardization and liability. Depot engineers grumbled about weld quality and mirror delamination. Somewhere in a headquarters, a colonel insisted that nothing was official until it came stamped and crated. But the sky does not wait on signatures. Over Bremen, over Düren, over the North German plain where contrails braided the high air into white ropes, gunners with mirrors and reticles were punching holes in fighters that had once hunted them with impunity. Romano kept flying. His totals rose not because he sought them, but because the job demanded it. He spoke little, fixed what broke, and taught what he knew to anyone who asked. A young gunner cornered him once in the chow line. "How far do you lead, Sarge?" Romano shrugged. "Half a reticle to start, then believe your mirrors, not your nerves." That advice, passed from tent to tent, may have saved as many lives as the brackets themselves. War rarely gives medals for ideas. It offers statistics, and those are earned in blood and metal. Yet if you pulled the curves, sortie survival, ammunition per kill, rear attack loss rate, and laid them over a calendar, you would find a kink beginning in mid-October 1943, steepening through November, hardening by December. Somewhere inside that bin sits a logbook with pencil sketches, a night in a hangar that smelled of oil and ozone, and a mirror that told the truth faster than fear could lie. By the end of the year, the 8th Air Force still bled, but it no longer hemorrhaged. Escorts were arriving in greater numbers, factories were learning new tricks, and in the cold tail of a flying fortress, A gunner with a steelworker's patience had proved that sometimes the fastest path to survival is the one that breaks a rule and creates a standard. By early 1944, the impact of Romano's design could be measured not in anecdotes, but in hard numbers. Air Force analysts at High Wycombe compared sortie records before and after the mirror reflector rollout. Tail attack losses dropped between 32 and 37%. The data were staggering. Hundreds of bombers that, by statistical expectation, should have vanished over Germany were instead limping home full of holes, but alive. Romano never claimed to understand the math of attrition curves or sortie replacement ratios, yet his field fix had quietly altered the economics of the air war. A B-17 cost roughly $275,000 to build. The lives inside were priceless, but the accountants at Wright Field translated every surviving aircraft into weeks of extended strategic pressure on the Reich's industry. A simple mirror bracket was returning dividends no logistics officer could have predicted. Boeing's Cheyenne tail turret, entering production that January, embodied Romano's concept in factory steel. Smoother glazing, a powered cradle, an innate reflector sight aligned almost exactly where his salvaged P-47 glass had sat. What had begun as a pencil sketch in a logbook now left the line stamped with serial numbers. The official manuals never mentioned Romano by name, but engineers quietly referred to the site layout as the Pittsburgh pattern. Romano kept flying through the bitter winter of 1,943-44. 7 confirmed kills, 4 probables. He never bragged. His crew said he treated shooting the way mill hands treated tightening bolts, steady work done right or not at all. In February, during Big Week, his Fortress took shrapnel over Leipzig. Hydraulic fluid sprayed the tail, fumes thick as fog. He stayed at his guns until the bomber crash-landed in Belgium. Captured days later, he spent the rest of the war in a German prison camp, weighing barely 127 pounds when liberated. When he came home in 1945, the Army Air Forces pinned the Distinguished Flying Cross on his uniform and noted innovative contribution to defensive armament effectiveness. The citation avoided the words unauthorized modification. He declined interviews, refused Boeing's invitation to Seattle, and returned to Pittsburgh to marry his high school sweetheart and work 37 years as a machinist. "I just made what I needed to survive," he told a neighbor once. Other people made it official, yet the ripple of that act spread far beyond one man. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey later calculated that improved tailgun sights reduced losses equivalent to roughly 840 aircraft and 8,400 crewmen, men who statistically should never have come home. The tactical consequence was equally profound. Luftwaffe fighter groups, forced to abandon rear-quarter assaults, shifted to head-on or high oblique approaches maneuvers that exposed them to formation fire and increased their own casualties. The air war's geometry had been redrawn by a sergeant's refusal to accept bad design. In 1983, at a reunion of the 91st Bomb Group held on the preserved tarmac of Bassingbourn, the veterans were gray-haired, slower, still hearing the drone of 4 Wright Cyclones in their dreams. One of them, Gerald Hammond, brought a small relic, a mirror bracket burnished smooth by time. He placed it in Romano's hands and said, "Because of you, I came home. My kids exist because you wouldn't settle for lousy sights." Romano blushed, muttered something about luck, but Hammond shook his head. "No, Mike, you didn't wait for luck. You built it." History tends to lionize the strategists, the generals, the engineers. The production czars, but war is often saved by mechanics in the margins. Romano's story endures because it reveals a quiet truth about innovation under fire. The best ideas are born not in design bureaus, but in desperation. When rules written for safety collide with the urgency of survival. Michael Romano died in 2003, age 79. His obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette read simply, World War II veteran, 8th Air Force. It said nothing about the mirrors, the night in the hangar, or the thousands who owed him their lives. But the legacy lives in the lineage of every defensive system that followed from the twin-tail B-29 seconds to the radar-guided turrets of the B-52. All of them rely on the same fundamental principle Romano proved with scavenged glass and nerve. Give the gunner immediate feedback, show him truth in real time, and he will fight smarter, faster, longer. In the end, the story of Staff Sergeant Michael Romano isn't just about a machine gun sight. It's about courage expressed as curiosity, the refusal to stop asking whether a better way might exist, even when the rulebook says no. Because in war, as in every human endeavor, sometimes the greatest act of bravery isn't pulling the trigger. It's picking up the wrench.